I've told this story so many times at the VFW, and every single time the guys just shake their heads in disbelief. It never fails. No matter how often I walk them through it, they look at me like I'm spinning some wild yarn. But this is word for word how it happened. Picture the scene. Madison Wright stands up at the head of the big conference table, eyes scanning the room like she's weighing each of us by the dollar. She wore that sharp navy suit she always favored, hair pulled back so tight it looked like it hurt. You could sense her confidence, no, her certainty that she belonged there, and in a way she did. Her father built Weston and Associates from the ground up, and when he handed her the keys as CEO, she took it as her birthright. "Tom, your position is no longer needed. HR will meet you downstairs." That's all she said, direct as a bullet. I'm sitting there, still clinging to my security briefing folder, its plastic cover warm from my hands and the adrenaline pulsing through me. Just minutes before, I'd wrapped up my final infrastructure assessment for our $3.2 billion NEOM logistics deal, a contract that would put us on the map in Saudi Arabia for a generation. Now everyone in that room, from the Saudi delegates to my own team, is staring at me like I'd turned invisible or grown a third arm. Let me back up a second. Name's Tom Reynolds. I'm 52 years old, and for the past 15 years I've been the guy you call when international logistics for defense contractors gets complicated. Until that morning, I was the Senior Director of International Logistics at Weston and Associates, but fancy titles don't tell you much. What matters is this. I held Pentagon Level 3 clearance for Saudi operations. I was the one they trusted when classified supply chain nightmares landed on our doorstep. When bureaucracy snarled the works or cultural misunderstandings threatened to blow up million-dollar deals, they called me. Not because I was a genius. Believe me, I've met plenty of geniuses who couldn't negotiate their way out of a paper bag. But because I knew the game. I'd spent years cultivating the right relationships, understanding the nuances, and learning how to thread the needle between American priorities and local realities. 15 years. That's a lot of midnight calls from Pentagon officials, a lot of red-eye flights to Riyadh, and a mountain of paperwork that would make most men weep. I navigated endless bureaucratic mazes, cut through red tape, and pulled off handshake deals with generals and ministers, agreements no lawyer could have drafted. I can't count the number of times I've saved this company's reputation, not to mention its bottom line, by keeping things running smoothly in the background. And my reward for all that? Getting canned in front of our biggest client, the same morning I delivered the single most important briefing of my career. You want the irony? Just a week earlier, Madison cornered me after one of those late-night strategy sessions. Just her, me, and 2 cups of burnt coffee. "You'll be right there next to me for the signing, Tom," she said. "This is going to be historic for the company." I believed her. After 15 years, you start to think loyalty's a two-way street. I should have known better. In this business, promises are as disposable as last quarter's forecasts. Madison Wright swept into Weston about a year and a half ago, right as I was hitting year 13. She was the company's answer to the future. Stanford MBA, 34 years old, CV packed with all the right buzzwords: blockchain, digital transformation, operational efficiency. The board practically salivated when she walked in. Sure, she was the founder's daughter, but she had brains to back it up. Her marching orders were clear. Modernize international operations, bring us into the 21st century, trim the fat. But what modernize really meant became obvious fast. Anything that didn't fit neatly into a spreadsheet was on the chopping block. All those long-standing military relationships, security protocols, and hand-to-hand trust building that kept our Middle East business alive. Suddenly, it was just legacy overhead. I remember her first team meeting like it was yesterday. She stood in front of us, clicking through a PowerPoint full of graphs and jargon. Digital transformation, streamlined processes, automated workflows, the whole playbook. Half her slides were about eliminating redundant human touchpoints and handing control to automated systems. I sat there, quietly fuming, thinking, "Lady, you can automate a lot of things, but you can't automate trust. You can't code your way into the confidence of a Saudi logistics chief or a Pentagon colonel." But I kept my mouth shut. 15 years in this game teaches you to pick your battles, and day one isn't the time to draw a line in the sand. Our first real head-to-head came about 6 months in. Madison fast-tracked a proposal for a major defense contract in Qatar, but skipped the required Pentagon clearance. The document included specs that flat-out violated ITAR. Those are the regulations that keep U.S. military technology from winding up in the wrong hands. If that had slipped through, We'd be looking at federal fines, lost contracts, and probably a congressional investigation. I caught the mistake during a routine security sweep, flagged the issues, and rebuilt the whole proposal from scratch to meet Department of Defense guidelines. Sent it through the proper channels, smoothed over the Pentagon contacts I'd spent years cultivating, and made sure the contract landed without a hitch. Madison never asked me how it got fixed or even seemed to notice. If I'm honest, I doubt she realized I'd touched it at all. But the part that sticks with me, the moment that changed everything, was what happened the following week. I'm walking past the boardroom, coffee in hand, and hear Madison's voice through a half-open door. We're streamlining operations. Too many layers slow us down. People like Tom Reynolds, good guy, but he gets bogged down in outdated protocols. We don't need to babysit clients through military bureaucracy. We just need signatures. That's what she said. I stood there frozen, coffee halfway to my lips, feeling this cold wave wash over me. Outdated protocols? She'd just dismissed 15 years of careful, back-channel relationship building, the stuff that kept American contractors out of international disasters, as nothing more than babysitting. I didn't confront her. What would have been the point? You don't last in this business by throwing tantrums in boardrooms or calling out the boss in front of her lieutenants. But I never forgot it. Sometimes you overhear something that flips a switch inside you, that makes you see everything in a new light. From that point on, I watched her changes with a different eye. The thing about Madison is she could make anything sound like progress. She'd talk about efficiency metrics and digital solutions and scalable frameworks, painting a picture of a company on the move. But what she was really doing was dismantling the relationships and institutional memory that kept us alive in a world where one wrong move could cost millions or worse. Like the time she axed our monthly Pentagon Liaison check-ins, calling them inefficient. She wanted to swap them for quarterly reports, convinced a few lines in a spreadsheet could replace years of trust and understanding. What she never understood, and what the board, blinded by her vision, refused to see, was that our business wasn't just about moving containers and signing contracts. It was about knowing who to call when a shipment got held up at the port of Dammam at 3 a.m. It was about recognizing when a local customs official was signaling a problem before it blew up into a crisis, or knowing the right questions to ask when a general's tone shifted during a meeting. These aren't things you teach in a Stanford classroom or plug into a dashboard. They're earned, over years, sometimes decades. Madison wanted Weston to run like a fintech startup, all algorithms and quarterly targets. But defense logistics isn't that simple. It's messy, political, and deeply human. Every relationship, every handshake, every late-night phone call is a thread in a complex web that keeps the whole thing from collapsing. I spent 15 years weaving that web, and she swept it aside in less than 2. So when I got fired, publicly in front of the Saudis right after closing our biggest deal, I wasn't just angry. I was disappointed, not just for myself, but for the company I'd poured my life into. I knew what was coming. The deals would get harder. The trust would erode. Sooner or later, someone would realize you can't just swap experience for efficiency without paying the price. That's why when the guys at the VFW ask me if I'd do it all again, I tell them the truth. I'd do the job over in a heartbeat, but I'd never again mistake a title or a handshake for real loyalty. And I'd never let anyone convince me that progress is worth more than the relationships that keep the whole thing together. I told her straight up, around here, trust isn't something you can build by ticking boxes or pushing paperwork. It's not about how many reports you file, or how many times you talk about transparency in a meeting. Trust is earned by being present, by sticking your neck out for your team when the situation spins out of control, by showing, through actions, not words, that you won't cut and run when things get tough. That's the only way it works in this business, especially when you're dealing with stakes as high as ours. But Madison just blinked at me, like I was reciting some ancient dialect. She came from a world of dashboards and KPIs, not one where you shake someone's hand and know you might have to bet your reputation, or your life on them. After that conversation, every meeting with her was like threading a needle with gloves on. She'd press for shortcuts, eager to hit arbitrary deadlines, while I'd insist we respect the process, the real one, the one that keeps us from stepping on landmines, literal or political. She was relentless, tossing out these ambitious, half-finished plans with no eye for detail, expecting someone else to patch the holes before they blew up in our faces. And all the while, she paraded around like she was the glue holding the whole show together, completely oblivious to the fact that I was the one quietly keeping the train on the tracks. I didn't complain. Years of military protocol had drilled it into me. Never let personal grievances get in the way of the mission. Just keep your head down, push through, do what needs to be done. But every day it got harder. I kept my reports crisp, my briefings sharp. But deep down, I was running on fumes. The frustration piling up behind a wall I couldn't let crack. Everything came to a head about a year after she joined. We were gunning for a massive logistics contract, joint ops in the Gulf, the kind of deal that could set the tone for our division for years. Madison waltzed in with her game-changing idea. Let an AI system generate our proposal responses. Why spend weeks crafting careful, nuanced pitches when a computer could spit something out in a few hours? She didn't get it. Our Saudi partners don't just expect technical accuracy. They expect respect for tradition, for protocol, for the shared history between our countries and our teams. Every word matters. There are signals and acknowledgments buried in the language, little gestures that say, "We remember, and we honor what's come before." That's not bureaucracy, that's relationship building. But Madison was convinced her tech solution was the future. Unsurprisingly, the AI churned out a proposal that was cold, generic, utterly devoid of any understanding of what the project really meant. It was like sending a form letter to someone on their wedding day. I could see the disaster coming from a mile away. So late at night, alone in my office, I did what I'd always done. I rewrote the crucial sections, wove in the references that would resonate, included the acknowledgments that signaled respect and partnership. I made sure every phrase reflected not just competence, but connection. Then I sent it in, under her name, because that's how the game was played. We won the contract, $1.8 billion over 3 years. Madison took a bow in front of the board, delivering a triumphant speech about innovation and disruption, never once hinting at the quiet rewrite that saved the day. To her, it was proof that her vision worked. To me, it was the last straw. That's when I started keeping records, copies of drafts, notes on key conversations, timestamps. I knew I needed a paper trail, not out of spite, but out of self-preservation. In our world, credit isn't just about ego. It's about who gets trusted with the next high-wire act. Then came the NEOM deal, the kind of project that makes or breaks careers, not just inside the company, but across the entire sector. $3.2 billion on the table, spanning defense, logistics, infrastructure, and security, with layers of complexity that would make most people's heads spin. The Saudis didn't just want technical solutions. They wanted assurances, relationships, a sense that their partners understood the stakes. I was in every meeting, not because it was in my job description, but because my clearance and history made me indispensable. The security protocols alone were labyrinthine: biometric authentication, background checks, cross-agency vetting. The Saudis trusted me because I'd earned it years ago, alongside them in the Gulf. You can't fake that kind of trust, and you can't hand it off to a newcomer just because they have the right credentials on paper. It's built over late nights in the operations tent, shared risks, and unspoken promises kept. But then, out of nowhere, Madison pulls the rug out from under me. In front of our top clients, she announces my replacement, as if I was just another cog to be swapped out. It wasn't just humiliating, it was reckless. Nobody else in the room knew the history, didn't realize that I'd been laying the groundwork for this deal long before Madison even knew what NEOM was. I'd known Admiral Hassan al-Mansouri since the early 2000s, back when we both wore the uniform and watched each other's backs in the Gulf. That kind of bond doesn't fade. When he took over the Saudi Defense Consortium, it wasn't Weston he trusted, it was me. I remember running into him at a defense conference in D.C. a few years back. He clapped me on the shoulder, grinned like we were still junior officers, then got serious. When NEOM comes up, your name's first on the list. Not your company's, yours. That's the kind of loyalty you can't buy or automate. For the contract signing, I didn't show up with some corporate trinket. I brought a display case with a challenge coin from our deployment, something that actually meant something. I wrote remarks that went beyond boilerplate, that spoke to brotherhood, to the sacrifices and victories we'd shared. But I didn't just rely on sentiment. I spent long nights poring over every clause in that contract, looking for anything that could be used as leverage, by us or against us. Deep in the fine print, I found a security continuity clause, a detail most would have missed, but one that could change everything if things went sideways. It was a reminder that in this business, real value is in the details, in the relationships, in the quiet work that happens behind the scenes. Madison would never understand that. But I did, and I was ready. If they pulled the designated Pentagon-cleared liaison before the authentication sequence wrapped up, the whole agreement would detonate after a 24-hour security review. That's how the process worked. A single misstep, a single deviation, and the Pentagon's automated systems would flag the contract for immediate suspension. There were no appeals, no lengthy conference calls for negotiation, no second chances, no bargaining. That was just the hard perimeter of the deal set in stone. I never brought this up to Madison, not because I was secretly hoping for the deal to implode, but because after 15 years navigating the labyrinth of defense contracting, I'd learned that real leverage wasn't in waving threats around like a warning flag. It was about knowing in your bones precisely where the boundaries lay and who was about to stumble across them. The most powerful person in the room was usually the one who understood the rules better than anyone else and knew which ones you could bend and which ones, if broken, would bring the ceiling down on everyone's head. The morning we were scheduled to finalize the signatures, Madison swept into the conference room and skimmed my prepared remarks. She made a face, puckering her lips like she'd just bitten into the world's sourest lemon. "Too sentimental, Tom," she said, eyes flicking over the lines I'd carefully crafted to balance diplomacy, respect, and the military's unspoken codes. "We need to hit efficiency metrics and timelines. That's what they care about." Then, without so much as a second glance, she handed my entire prep packet to Brittany Fitzgerald, her cousin, 26, fresh out of business school, and possibly the only person in the room who'd need a primer on the difference between a defense contractor and a coffee order. Brittany was a sweet kid, eager and polite, but watching her get ready for this was like watching someone prep for brain surgery using a YouTube tutorial and a butter knife. She stumbled over even the most basic contractor names, mangled military acronyms, and seemed genuinely puzzled when she asked, "So, what's a security clearance exactly?" Madison rolled her eyes and waved it away. "It's just paperwork, Brittany. The important thing is to talk up our digital capabilities and scalable solutions." I just sat there listening to them thinking, are you actually serious? You're about to risk a $3.2 billion deal because you think security protocol is just a pile of forms to check off? In this business, knowing the difference between a background check and a clearance, between protocol and mere formality, was the line between partnership and catastrophe. But I didn't argue. I didn't fight to keep my remarks or insist we stick to the script. I just smiled, pocketed my notes, and let Madison take the reins, watching her talk circles about digital transformation and streamlined processes. She had no clue that my silence wasn't compliance, it was observation. I could already see the dominoes lining up, ready to fall. Sometimes, the most effective move is to let things unfold when you know how the story ends. The day before the signing, Jimmy Rodriguez from CENTCOM gave me a call. I'd mentored Jimmy when he was just a fresh-faced lieutenant, still learning how to navigate the Pentagon's corridors. Now he was a major, handling sensitive logistics and impossible timelines. "Tom, heads up," he said, his voice low, the way people get when they're passing on something you're not supposed to know. "Word is, Weston's switching the liaison on this Saudi deal. That true?" "Yeah, looks like it," I replied, bracing myself for the obvious. "Man, that's not good. You know Admiral Al-Mansouri personally requested you, right? It's in the contract addendum." I knew. I'd written that clause myself, tucked it in there to make sure there'd be continuity and trust. Jimmy went on, "Just so you know, Pentagon's got automated monitoring on all these major contracts now. If the liaison changes and protocol isn't followed to the letter, the whole deal gets flagged. No exceptions." I thanked him, but this was old news to me. I'd been part of the team that designed those exact systems, back when my days were spent elbow-deep in Pentagon liaison work, constructing the guardrails that kept these deals from veering into disaster. Thursday morning started out like any other. Lukewarm coffee growing colder by the minute beside a stack of classified briefings, my badge hanging around my neck like a talisman. By 3:30, though, you could feel the tension in the air, thickening as the clock ticked down. I took my usual seat, watching Admiral Al-Mansouri's entourage file in. Even dressed in tailored suits, the military men stood out, a certain discipline in their posture, an alertness in their eyes. Admiral Al-Mansouri himself gave me a nod, the sort of brief, understated gesture that passes between old shipmates, an acknowledgement that speaks more than words ever could. Next to Madison, Brittany was white-knuckling my challenge coin display like it might explode in her hands. Despite hours of rehearsals, you could see the anxiety radiating off her, a raw, untempered nervousness that no amount of corporate training could mask. Madison beamed, projecting her best boardroom confidence. "Before we begin the authentication sequence, I'd like to introduce our new liaison coordinator, Brittany Fitzgerald. She'll be handling all communications from this point forward." Brittany stood, unfolding my notes, and attempted to deliver the remarks. It was excruciating. She pronounced modulus as mad jizz, which for anyone in the room fluent in Arabic was less a word and more a painfully awkward misstep, bordering on the obscene. She mangled military terminology, referring to our joint operations as joint cooperations, and passed the challenge coin to Admiral al-Mansouri with zero explanation, like she was handing over a business card rather than a symbol of trust and mutual respect. The Admiral's expression tightened, just a flicker, barely perceptible but unmistakable if you knew what to look for. The kind of micro-expression military men develop from years of keeping their true thoughts behind a wall. He accepted the coin with the distant, polite courtesy of someone who'd just watched a vital tradition fumbled. He didn't even glance at it, didn't give the customary response that signals mutual understanding and respect. The other Saudi officials exchanged glances, a silent conversation, a subtle acknowledgement that something essential had just been overlooked. There was no shouting, no dramatic gestures, just a profound, heavy silence that settled over the room. In that moment, I knew the deal was lost. Madison, oblivious to the currents in the room, turned to me with her perfected corporate smile, expecting everything to proceed as planned. She had no idea she just tripped a wire that had been there all along, one I'd seen coming but she never even knew existed. "Tom, can you step outside for a minute?" Madison's voice was clipped, professional to the point of brittle. I followed her out into the hallway, my footsteps echoing off the walls lined with those sepia-toned snapshots, every one documenting a contract I'd secured, a deal I'd sweated over. Funny how the ghosts of old victories stare down at you in moments like this, as if to remind you how quickly the ground can shift beneath your feet. HR was already waiting, the picture of corporate efficiency. Janet Phillips, 8 years sharing late-night deadlines and quarterly fires. But now she can't even meet my eyes. She holds out an envelope with trembling hands. The moment feels rehearsed but no less surreal for it. Madison cuts in, her tone sharp enough to slice through any pretense of empathy. "This is effective immediately. We appreciate your service to the company." 15 years, distilled to a single line. No acknowledgement of the nights spent in war rooms, or the quiet, careful maneuvering that got us through doors that should have stayed shut. Janet's voice is barely audible, the words flat and weightless. "You'll need to turn in your badge and access cards. Someone will walk you to your office for your things." So we head back, the three of us in a silent procession, the conference room suddenly a stage. Every pair of eyes there is hungry for a reaction, some spark of outrage, some flash of drama. I keep my expression unreadable, gather my folder and look squarely at Admiral al-Mansouri. Over the years I'd picked up enough Arabic to make my farewell count. I say quietly, "May your decisions today be remembered with honor. My brother." He pauses, eyes narrowing with understanding, and replies, "And may yours be as well until we meet again." The words hang between us, freighted with more meaning than the rest of the room can guess. He knows the game, knows exactly what's being played out here, and more importantly, he knows I didn't ask for any of it. That night, my apartment feels emptier than usual. I sit by the window, bourbon in hand, watching the PTWAC lights blink against the twilight. Pentagon looming across the river, detached and unblinking. I don't call anyone. No angry emails drafted and deleted, no venting in burner chats. When you've spent years orchestrating chaos and containment, you learn there's a time to let silence settle. Watching a controlled demolition, after all, is all about waiting for the dust to clear. But here's where the story takes a turn. Most people assume a firing is the end of the line, a clean break. They never think about the systems humming beneath the surface, the ones built not just for efficiency but for security. Somewhere deep in a DoD server farm, the system is already processing my removal. My clearance wasn't just a line on my badge. It was hardwired into the backbone of the NEOM contract, the linchpin that let the deal move at all. When HR deleted my access, it didn't just erase an employee. It tripped a failsafe. At 8:47 p.m., my secure phone buzzes. Encrypted alert, primary clearance removed, security protocol 7 engaged, 24-hour review initiated. Protocol 7 isn't just another bureaucratic speed bump. It means every classified operation under that umbrella slams to a halt. No one moves forward, no assets transferred, until a replacement with matching clearance is found and vetted. For a project as specialized as NEOM, that's not a matter of days or even weeks. It could take months, if it happens at all. I set the phone down, the bourbon suddenly burning a little less. This wasn't some grand act of sabotage, no calculated speech or thrown chair. It was simply the machinery of security doing exactly what it was designed to do, A consequence written into the code, overlooked by people too eager to clean house. At 9:15, another encrypted message pings through. Jimmy Rodriguez at CENTCOM, never one for small talk. Tomorrow gets interesting. That's all he writes. I read it twice, let the words settle, then power down the phone. Control in this business isn't about loud gestures or public drama. It's about knowing which dominoes are already tipping and having the nerve to let gravity do the work. The next morning, the world wakes up to consequences. I'm at my kitchen table, coffee in hand, scrolling through the news feeds out of habit. At 9:30 a.m., headlines start flashing. Saudi Defense Consortium pulls out of the $3.2 billion deal, citing security protocol violations. The analysts barely have time to digest it before the market reacts. Weston and Associates, the new golden child, takes a nosedive, down 8%, then 12%, dropping further with each refresh. By the time I'm pouring my second cup, they're down 16%. The floor still nowhere in sight. But the real blow is still coming. Someone, maybe a disgruntled insider, maybe a foreign observer with a grudge, leaks the security continuity clause to the financial press. The clause is explicit. Pull the cleared primary liaison mid-negotiation and the contract becomes null and void. No exceptions, no appeals. The story spreads with the speed of wildfire, picked up by every defense blog and industry newsletter. Negligence, oversight. In this world, those words cut deeper than any public censure, branding you as unreliable, a risk no one can afford. Then, as if on cue, the video surfaces. Someone on Al-Mansouri's team, never underestimate a frustrated partner, recorded the meeting. Every mispronounced military acronym, every fumbled answer during Brittany's presentation, every awkward silence. They chop it into a highlight reel, set it to captions that pull no punches. By the afternoon, it's viral in contractor circles. Over 250,000 views and climbing. The hashtag Know Your Partners is trending, a public lesson served cold. I watch it all unfold from my living room. The TV muted, the light outside fading into evening. There's no gloating in it, no sense of victory. Just the cold, steady realization that for some people, the only way to learn the value of details is to pay the price in full. Around noon, my phone rings. Mike Patterson, out at Rathon these days, his voice a mix of disbelief and schadenfreude. Holy hell, Tom. What happened over there? I just give him the truth, stripped of spin or bitterness. Madison Wright happened. And sometimes, that's all the explanation there is. I told him straight out. The kid honestly thought she could just waltz through Pentagon protocols like she was cutting in line at Starbucks. No respect for the process. No sense of what those clearances and relationships really meant. Unreal. Word was already all over town. Every major contractor knew you'd been axed just before the deal went through. And in a world as tight-knit as defense contracting, that kind of news moves faster than any official memo. By the time I heard, it was clear to me. It was curtains for them, whether they realized it yet or not. In this business, your reputation isn't just important. It's the foundation every handshake and contract is built on. Once people start thinking you take those long-built relationships for granted, especially the ones that got you in the room in the first place, no one wants to touch you. They know you can't buy trust, and you sure as hell can't bluff it. By Friday afternoon, the media had already shifted gears. The headlines weren't about the size of the contract anymore. They were about a leadership meltdown at Weston and Associates. The Pentagon, never one for theatrics, quietly dropped an administrative review on them. That might sound routine, but anyone in the field knows it's a death sentence in slow motion. Every defense contract of theirs was frozen while the bureaucrats poked around. And investors responded exactly as you'd expect. The stock tanked, and the board went on the warpath, demanding explanations and accountability. I wasn't in that emergency board meeting, but after 2 decades in the business, I could see it play out clear as day. Picture a glossy mahogany table, directors in expensive suits, faces tight with frustration and fatigue, flanked by screens beaming in investors across 3 time zones, each one looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. My own phone buzzed nonstop. Old colleagues, some from inside the company, eager to spill the latest, to vent or gossip or just connect with someone who'd understand. Their stories all matched what I'd expected, a classic unraveling. First, they zeroed in on Richard Wright, Madison's father, a man who'd always traded on his name and old contacts. They grilled him. How had such a basic security check been missed? Why yank their only Pentagon-cleared liaison right before a $3.2 billion signing? His answer about operational restructuring fell flat, a hollow phrase that didn't fool anyone, and certainly didn't satisfy the board. Then it was Madison's turn in the hot seat. They wanted to know why she had replaced their most seasoned Middle East coordinator, right in the middle of the most critical negotiation in company history. She launched into a speech about efficiency and modernization, but the room was silent. Everyone knew those were buzzwords, not answers. Then came the real blow. General Patricia Hayes, one of Weston's biggest defense investors and a woman I'd worked with on 3 major contracts, fixed Madison with a steely look. "Do you even know who Admiral Al-Mansouri trusted in that room?" she asked, and that was all it took. There was no need to say more. The answer was obvious, and it wasn't Madison. In a field where trust is measured by decades, not quarters, that moment was fatal. That evening, Sarah Martinez, my old assistant, a survivor if ever there was one, sent me a message. The board had told Madison to call me. Not the CEO, not some HR rep. Madison herself. She called, left voicemails, tried again. I let every call go to voicemail. Sometimes, the most powerful response is silence. You learn after enough years that nothing speaks louder than refusing to be pulled back into a sinking ship. By Monday, everything had flipped. The calls that came in were different. Colleagues congratulating me, people hinting at new opportunities. Then came the official invitation, delivered by secure courier, thick embossed paper, Department of Defense letterhead. You don't ignore something like that. Admiral Al-Mansouri's office wanted to see me in D.C. Tuesday morning, 10:02 sharp. I got there early, as always. The building radiated quiet authority, polished granite, discreet glass, expensive but never ostentatious. Even the receptionist, a retired Marine from the look of him, treated me like a peer. Inside the conference room, Admiral Al-Mansouri was already there, joined by Colonel James Patterson and General Patricia Hayes, the same General Hayes who delivered the coup de grace at the Weston board meeting. The Admiral stood to greet me, radiating that unmistakable command presence even in a tailored suit. "Tom," he said, "we'd like you to join us as Senior Strategic Advisor for North American Defense Operations." They spelled it out for me. $285,000 base salary, nearly triple what Weston ever paid me. $150,000 signing bonus, comprehensive benefits, and the kind of real authority I'd always wanted. The power to actually shape defense partnerships. Not just watch from the edges while some barely qualified executive tried to Google their way through Pentagon red tape. For the first time in years, I felt that old sense of purpose, the knowledge that I could make a difference again. But Admiral Al-Mansouri wasn't finished. He leaned forward, his expression serious. "Tom, do you know why we pulled out of Weston so fast?" I shook my head, curious. "We were testing them. We needed to know if they valued the relationship, the person who'd worked to build trust, or just the name on the door. When they let you go a day before final sign-off, they gave us all the answer we needed." There was a pause in the room. Not uncomfortable, but the kind of silence that settles when something important has just been said, and everyone is letting it sink in. Colonel Patterson grinned, breaking the tension. "Besides, we saw that video clip, someone saying mad jizzes instead of modulus at the final review. That's just disrespectful." I had to laugh at that. That's the military, direct but always with an eye for the details that matter. I signed right there, knowing I was stepping into something that mattered again. When we shook hands, Admiral Al-Mansouri looked me in the eye and said, "It's good to work with someone who understands that trust isn't built on quarterly reports or titles. It's earned day by day through service." That hit home. In this business, relationships aren't just a line on a spreadsheet. They're the backbone of everything. And when you have that, you don't just survive the storms. You outlast them. Stepping out of that building, it was as if the whole city had shifted into sharper focus. Colors seemed brighter, sounds crisper, the air itself lighter, unburdened. It felt like I'd finally shrugged off a weight that had been pressing me down for years. The kind of heaviness you only notice when it's suddenly gone. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, I wasn't haunted by that constant sense of being invisible. My contributions overlooked, my value questioned. Instead, I felt something almost electric. A sense of being chosen, of finally being seen by people who understood not just what I did, but why it mattered. Weston and Associates, on the other hand, didn't get a soft landing. The Defense Logistics Agency blacklisted them, ostensibly for violating security liaison protocols, but everyone in the industry knew the real reason ran deeper. Their entire web of contracts, more than $8.5 billion worth of business built over years, evaporated nearly overnight. No warning, no negotiation, just gone, like a light switched off in a storm. Their competitors didn't waste time. Within days, rival firms moved in, picking apart what was left, scooping up talent and clients and any scrap of value that remained. Madison got reassigned to some domestic digital project, a kind of bureaucratic exile, thinly disguised as opportunity. But everyone knew it was a deliberate move to keep her as far from sensitive international work as possible. Her flagship modernization initiative, which she'd championed with so much fanfare, sputtered out after just 18 months, undone by the same hubris that had gotten her into trouble in the first place. Richard Wright, her father and CEO, managed to cling to his title for 3 months longer, but the board's patience ran out. Forced into early retirement, he left behind a legacy in shambles. Investors have no tolerance for leaders who let their children gamble away decades of trust and relationships, especially not when the stakes involve the Pentagon. But honestly, I didn't spend my days reveling in their downfall. The truth is, after that day, I rarely gave any of them a second thought. Our paths had diverged so completely that it was almost as if we'd never been part of the same narrative. Their world spun further and further away, consumed by crisis management and damage control, while mine moved in an entirely new direction. 6 months later, I find myself in a new office with a panoramic view of the Washington Monument, a daily reminder of the gravity and history of the work we do. I'm surrounded by colleagues who truly get it, who know that not everything in defense can, or even should, be modernized, digitized, or reduced to an algorithm. There's a kind of wisdom in understanding that some things, like trust, shared service, and mutual respect, can't be streamlined without sacrificing what makes them valuable in the first place. It's quietly gratifying to realize that my worth isn't determined by people who never really understood the rules of the game we were playing. The NEOM project moved on too, barely missing a beat. Admiral Al-Mansouri's group found new American partners in just 3 weeks. A nimble Texas firm run by ex-military folks who valued boots-on-the-ground results over slick presentations. They understood the difference between chasing efficiency for its own sake and actually delivering on the mission. My old friend Mike Patterson called recently, his tone a mixture of curiosity and schadenfreude. "You catch Weston's latest quarterly report?" he asked. I shook my head, hadn't followed them in ages. Down 47% year over year, rumors of layoffs, some are even whispering bankruptcy. I didn't feel vindictive satisfaction or even much pity. Instead, there was a steady, unshakable certainty. In this business, some mistakes are so costly that only time and a lot of pain can drive the lesson home. Now I'm working on a $4.2 billion infrastructure project, collaborating with 3 allied nations, each with its own culture, its own priorities, its own sense of pride. My security clearance went up, not down, and I lead a team that actually listens when I explain why certain protocols exist, why some corners should never be cut. Just last week, a freshly minted MBA joined the team, full of bright ideas about optimizing authentication and streamlining procedures. I let him finish, then paused, looking him in the eye. "Let me tell you a story about a company that tried to out-clever Pentagon security," I began. He listened, scribbled notes, and, unlike some of his predecessors, asked questions that showed he understood the stakes. Maybe with any luck he'll learn from the scars others earned. As for Madison Wright, last I heard she'd landed in Austin, throwing herself into some tech startup aimed at disrupting food delivery. She's still chasing innovation, still convinced she can outmaneuver the competition, though this time the risks are measured in late pizza orders, not national security. I wish her luck, but I doubt she'll ever grasp the difference between transformation and recklessness. Me? I'm exactly where I belong, working alongside people who know that in defense, relationships aren't a cost to be minimized or a line item to be optimized. They're the very foundation of everything we do. They're what keep missions moving, allies connected, and crises averted. That's worth more than any glossy modernization Weston ever dreamed up in a boardroom. Sometimes the truest revenge isn't loud or dramatic. It's simply thriving in the spaces where others said you'd never fit. Excelling at work they thought a machine could do better, and moving forward without ever needing to look back. So that's the arc of my story, one that's still unfolding every day. Now, who's buying the next round? Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's that the best victories are shared with those who truly understand what it took to get here.